Welcome to this sponsored webinar by Accountancy Insurance, hosted by CPA Australia, on how cyber attacks affected accounting firms in 2021. My name is Claire Grayston and I'm a Senior Manager in Policy and Advocacy at CPA Australia. We have people joining us from all over the country for today's webinar, so I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners from around Australia and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I extend this acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us today. It's now my great pleasure today to introduce you to Julie Forsyth, Account Manager, Professional Risks and Accountancy at Accountancy Insurance, and Rob Collier, Underwriting Development Manager at NOVA Underwriting. Today, we'll be taking questions through our Q&A box. Please direct questions to all panelists. We'll address the questions at the conclusion of the presentation, and we'll do our best with all the time remaining to address all of your questions. For any troubleshooting queries, please do send a message to Melissa using the chat box. So now it's time to commence our session, and I'd like to hand over to Julie to kick us off. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Claire. My name is Julie Forsyth and I work with Accountancy Insurance, who are the official national taxation affiliate of CPA Australia. Accountancy Insurance are pleased to support tax-related events, workshops and webinars that are run and held throughout the company. Oh, sorry, having a technical issue myself. Okay, cyber attacks, ransomware and hackers. These are all really hot topics in the world today. In today's session, we'll run through an overview of ransomware. What is it? Should you pay it? We'll look at who the big targets are. Big businesses, small businesses, individuals, or all of the above. We'll talk through some of the ways that you can manage your risk. And then Rob will give us some real life war stories, examples of things that he has seen in the cybercrime space. Cyber attacks are unfortunately a reality that shows no sign. Oh, sorry, guys. It shows no sign of decreasing. In fact, if this year is anything to go by, it's quite the opposite. 2021 has been a massive year for ransomware. This slide here shows just some of the high-profile companies that have fallen victim to ransomware. And look at some of those names. We've got Google, Microsoft, Nine Network, Toll Group, McDonald's. Everyone is a target. So ransomware is not a term that everyone is familiar with. So what is it? It's essentially a malicious code that is dropped onto your computer by cyber criminals. Suddenly, you go to access something on your computer and nothing. This code that was dropped into your system locks your computer so you are unable to access your files, data, or anything, essentially grinding your business to a halt. The hacker will then send you a message providing instructions on how to forward the ransom money or Bitcoin to enable you to regain access to your own system. Whether we like it or not, every one of us is at risk of being a victim of a cyber attack. But it's companies that are considered the biggest moneymaker for cyber criminals. And unless you disconnect yourself from the internet entirely, you cannot be considered completely safe. And let's be honest, disconnecting yourself from the internet is not a realistic option in this day and age. Without a doubt, there is an explosion of ransomware attacks that seek to extort money from businesses. And this is not something that happens only every now and then. It's not a rarity. According to the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, there is a cyber attack reported every 8 minutes. There's no easy or quick fix if you have suffered a cyber attack. Channel 9 was attacked earlier this year. I believe it was March. Now, there was no ransomware exchanged and none of their information was leaked. Now, this seems like a lucky break, and maybe it was, but despite this apparent good fortune, it was an incredibly costly exercise and caused a huge amount of disruption. 3 months after their ransomware attack, the Channel 9 systems were still not back to full functionality. So just think about that. You're attacked in March, and in June, you're still suffering the consequences. Previously, cyber criminals looked for vulnerability in their targets. However, they are now seemingly more targeted in their approach and in their goals. In 2021, the accounting industry was in the top 3 sectors to notify data breaches to the Office of the Australian Information Commission. Accountants hold so much sensitive information and data, and it's information that is highly valuable to cyber criminals. It makes a lot of sense that cyber criminals are targeting this particular industry. The OAIC recently reported that ransomware incidents in Australia increased by 24% when compared to the previous 6 months. Look, there's no doubt that cyber attacks are expensive, but interestingly, it's not always the ransom itself that is the most costly part. It's the associated expenses, things like hiring forensic IT companies and restoring the system, and not to mention the exorbitant cost of your staff being unable to effectively perform their duties whilst waiting for this restoration to take place. If you got hit with a ransomware attack, would you simply pay the ransom? Well, ABC News have reported that over 1/3 of Australian organisations who have been hit by a ransomware attack did pay the ransom in order to get the decryption key from the cyber criminals. This may resolve the issue in the short term, and it certainly has the appeal of enabling businesses to continue as normal. But what it doesn't do is determine why or how the attack was able to happen in the first place, which is obviously making you susceptible to future attacks. Now, I couldn't tell you, and I'm sure Rob will agree, how many times I've heard and even said myself, it won't happen to me, I won't get hacked. Well, I can tell you that it does, and you likely will. The Office of the Australian Information Commission reported that a whopping 65% of data breaches were caused by malicious attack. Human error accounted for 30%, with the remaining 5% of breaches being due to a system fault. As I mentioned previously, as many as 1/3 of organisations simply paid the ransom, thinking that it was going to be a quick fix to getting all their data back. And yes, you may get your data back quickly, but there are obviously other costs to consider. Not only is the ransom generally a significant amount of money, but conducting all that post-event analysis, system rebuilds, and data recovery after the event can also be very costly. It's these things that are critical to the ongoing functional operation of a business that often take weeks and weeks of work, or months, as was the case with Channel 9. Another phrase that we hear regularly is, they're not going to bother hacking me, I'm just a small business. Cyber criminals don't only target big or high-profile businesses. In fact, in many cases, it's the smaller businesses that are considered more desirable targets. This is because it's probably for many reasons, but some of which are they They hold all the same information that the bigger businesses do. You know, client information, personal information, banking details, etc. However, the smaller businesses often don't have the same resources to invest in the best systems, software, or hardware to protect that data. Therefore, they are potentially easier to hack, making them a better or easier target. Although smaller businesses may not have the resources of the likes of, your Googles and your Microsofts, they still need to try and do everything possible to invest as much as they can to protect their client data and their systems and implement strategies to reduce the impact if a cyber attack does occur. Okay, we all use these apps in our daily lives, whether it be on our phones, our laptops, our tablets, our computers. And because of that, we're all susceptible to being scammed. In 2021, the top 10 apps people were scammed on are ones that we've all heard of and potentially used. They were Facebook, Google Hangouts, Instagram, WhatsApp, Plenty of Fish, Match, Our Time, Zoosk, Words with Friends, and Tinder. The top 3 types of scams were account cloning on Facebook, romance scams on Google Hangouts, and fake brand giveaways on Instagram. To avoid these types of scams, there's lots of things you can do, but search for yourself regularly on Facebook. Just make sure that the profile that you created for yourself is the only one that's popping up. Never send money to someone that you meet on a dating app. It sounds so obvious, but clearly it happens. It was, number 6 in the top 10. And on Instagram, it's not very often that we get something for nothing. So research those brand giveaways and make sure that it's the brand's official Instagram page. The best way to avoid any of this happening to you is to ensure that your network is secure as possible against cyber attacks in the first instance. Items to tick off are to make sure that your operating systems and security patches are up to date. Apply multi-factor authentication across the network. It's a security measure that requires 2 or more proofs of identity in order to grant you access. So having this applied offers more powerful security and protection because the cyber criminal or hacker may manage to steal one proof of identity, like your PIN, but they still need to obtain and use the others to access your account. Organizations should regularly back up their networks and store those backups offline. That way, in the event of a successful ransomware attack, the network can be restored with the least disruption possible. Now, this is one that I'm potentially guilty of myself. Always create complex passwords. Despite the fact that we all have what seems like a million passwords, and it's incredibly annoying, not to mention a big test on the old memory, get creative. Don't have password as your password. And always, always upload the Apple or Android security updates. But you can do all the right things and still find yourself the victim of a cyber attack. And there's no stigma anymore around having been the victim of a cyber breach. In fact, with the mandatory reporting requirements in place, you need to acknowledge that it's happened and demonstrate what you are doing to contain it and what systems are being put in place to limit the risk of it happening again. Okay, we have a poll. So it's over to you guys now. We've got a poll question for you. How much do you think that your identity could be sold for on the dark web by cyber criminals? We've got less than $20, $100, or $200. I'll give you a little minute to put your answers in. Okay, I think that poll's ended. Have we got the results? Okay, so I can tell you that the bulk of people who responded believe that the answer is less than $20. And you're 100% correct. So for less than $20, cyber criminals can get your full information. They can commit identity fraud, which includes things like opening up new lines of credit in your name, taking over your bank accounts, withdrawing money from those bank accounts, and so many other things. Cybercrime is not going anywhere, and it's a big deal with an even bigger price tag. Cybercrime is one of the largest threats to the Australian GPD, and according to the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, cybercrime costs the Australian economy up to $1 billion each year in direct costs. It's mind-blowing to me. And on a global scale, Cybersecurity Venture, which is a research and publishing company, estimates that cybercrime damages will have cost the world $6 trillion during 2021. Crazy amount of money. All right, we do have one more poll question for you. How much do you think that Australians lost to scammers in the first 9 months only of 2021? So January through to September. We've got $180 million, $211 million, or $280 million. Okay. Let's see. Of those that answered, most of you believe that the answer is $280 million. It is in fact $211 million, which is still a massive number. And it's also a huge jump from $175 million last year, an increase of over $35 million in just 12 months. Now, if we break that cost down to per incident, the average loss per incident this year was $11,000 compared to $7,000 in 2020. This year also saw a spike in phone-based scams. These hackers are becoming more sophisticated and crafty. You know, the ones where you receive calls from people telling you that they are from a trusted and known organisation to you, like your Telstra or your NBN provider. They tell you that you've been breached and that someone is illegally using your system, and they ask that you please go to your laptop, log on, and allow them to have remote access. We've all had it. I know personally I've had a few of those calls, so I'm sure that some, if not most of you, have also. Some may think that they don't necessarily need to worry about any of this. They're not going to be a victim of a cyber attack because of the antivirus software they have installed, or the firewalls, and of course, their IT support. But those things alone will not stop a cyber attack from occurring. They may help, but they cannot be relied on to be your only source of protection. To further protect your business everyone should seriously consider having a standalone first-party cyber insurance policy. Now, this isn't an alternative to what you already have in place. This should be seen as an additional layer of protection or security. Think of it like your car insurance. So you can have the best car on the market with all the safety features available, but at the end of the day, if you crash, you're going to contact your insurer to help you through the process. A cyber insurance policy is the same. It provides you with some peace of mind, knowing that despite your best efforts, if you are the victim of a cyber attack, you have further protection and assistance available to you. Some of the benefits of Cyber Shield are that it has been designed specifically with accountants in mind for accounting firms, and it's relevant to the needs of the accounting profession. The cover provided is comprehensive and ranges from data recovery to privacy, regulatory defence costs, plus much, much more. And competitive premiums are a certainty. So if you don't have a cyber insurance policy in place, I would strongly recommend that you take the time to investigate it as an option to help ensure the protection of your business. So on that note, I will hand over to Rob to go through some case studies with you and tell you some of those war stories that he's come across.
Thanks for that, Julie. Yeah, thank you for a fantastic overview of the cybercrime in Australia and ransomware in particular. Thank you very much for everybody joining today, and I'll be running through, as Julie said, some real life case studies, real life examples that we've seen from an insurer perspective. In terms of ransom demands, we've certainly seen, I guess, in recent times, the dollar value explode. Historically speaking, ransomware demands have been low to allow businesses to be able to afford to pay them, but we've seen them explode in recent times because they've gone beyond just a ransom demand to unlock your systems and your files to an additional demand for payment to stop them releasing the personal information of your clients to the dark web or to other criminals. So we'll kick off with the first example, and they're all very common to the accounting profession and accounting firm. So this particular one, we had a small accounting firm with 10 staff suffered a ransomware attack. After one of the staff opened up what they thought to be an invoice attachment on an email, and the attachment unfortunately contained the CryptoLocker virus, which was very common going back 3 or 4 years. All the computers in the office froze, and a message popped up demanding $8,000 payable in Bitcoin for the release of the system. And this would then increase by a further $1,200 per day until such time it was paid. Now, as Julie mentioned earlier, the costs don't necessarily just revolve around the ransom demand, it's also the associated costs. And in this particular case, it was costs of IT forensics, rebuilding their system from scratch after it was discovered was full of bugs, business interruption costs, public relations costs, along with the cost of notifying the Privacy Commissioner, together with customers and suppliers whom had their personal information breached. And the total cost to the client and to the insurer, I guess they were insured at that time, was around $84,000. So a significant cost for a small accounting firm. We'll jump into the next one. And this was a case where an employee received an email purporting to be from the Australian Tax Office, requesting they click on a link to access their latest statement. It looked legit, and unbeknown to the client, the link was infected with malware, effectively giving a cyber criminal access to the firm's admin systems. Now, In this particular case, the cyber criminal hung around within the systems for several months, learning who was who in the organisation. And 3 months after the initial attack, the managing director received an email advising that all files had been locked and would only be released on payment of 5 Bitcoin, which at that stage was worth $100,000. Again, notification was made to us. Our IT forensics teams were released to the client, and it was found that all backups had been encrypted, so we couldn't get that information or those files back from backups, and couldn't recover any of that information. So we paid the ransom, and a key was provided by the cyber criminals to unlock the files, which they were. But the total cost to the business, which included such things as those IT forensics, the ransom, business interruption costs, ended up being over $250,000. So a significant loss, a significant claim for that particular example. The next one, the next two are probably very common in terms of everybody working from home over the last 12 months to 2 years. In this particular case, the person was working from home on a personal laptop connected to the office network, and the employee was on social media at the time. A pop-up appeared advertising a watch on sale that they were interested in. As it was a personal laptop, it wasn't one that was issued by the firm. They had not updated security patches, and malware was easily installed by the cyber criminals. Again, multi-factor authentication, something that Julie mentioned before, had not been enabled, so the cyber criminals were able to gain easy access to the work network through that employee's personal laptop. Common issue, files were locked, client's personal information was copied, and a ransom demand was made via email. Now, luckily, this insurance policy had, as standard, our breach response service attached, which was triggered, and we were able to bring in the experts required immediately when they became aware of it. Offsite backups were intact in this particular case, not like the previous one, so files were able to be recovered and reinstalled. In that particular case, we didn't have to pay any ransomware demand, but total costs, as we've mentioned before, skyrocketed in terms of the forensics, the business interruption, notification costs, both to the Privacy Commissioner as well as those who had their information obtained. And then something else that we often provide is credit monitoring costs for a further 12 months. So if there's anything like customer data such as credit cards stolen, we bring in a credit monitoring firm that will monitor those numbers for the next 12 months to see if they're being used anywhere within the world. Final example that we've got, again, is a computer used at home. In this particular case, it was a shared home computer that a family of 4 shared. They also used an iPad for social media, and all devices within that home were connected to the home Wi-Fi. One of the children asked their mum to read a school assignment, and the mother sent the document from the home computer to a work email account. She then edited that school assignment from a work laptop and sent it back to the home computer. On opening the assignment on the home computer, all the documents looked different. It also asked for a password, which was very odd to the parent. And the file was, because the file was not password protected. A few minutes later, a pop-up appeared on the screen asking to pay a ransom of 1 Bitcoin, as well as instructions on how to pay it, which made the process quite easily. Now, in this particular case, the family were quite smart, and they immediately disconnected all their devices from the home Wi-Fi. IT professionals were contacted and found that one of the kids had turned off auto updates months ago, so they weren't getting the updated patches, updated security patches automatically. the ransomware that was installed on the system was removed and the encrypted files backed up to an external storage device. On all devices, the latest version of Microsoft was installed and multi-factor authentication then installed and more complex passwords used. So you can see in that particular case, something that could happen to any of us using devices that haven't been provided by our work and don't contain updated software patches or the correct multi-factor authentication. And that's the last example I've got. I've got hundreds of examples. So yeah, I'm more than happy to share additional ones in the future if there's any particular areas you would like me to. But I'll pass back to Claire to see if there's any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob and Julie, for that fantastic presentation. We've got one question coming through the Q&A, and I would just remind everybody to please put any questions that you have in the Q&A so that Rob and Julie can address those. So this is, I guess, a bit more of a statement rather than a question, but you might have some observations on this. So Michael is saying all large entities and maybe smaller companies as well should make it easier to report possible scams. So he was noting that, for example, Telstra doesn't make it very easy to report, but ASIC and the ATO have been very active in this space. So a direct link to the affected company would be more efficient. So yeah, so did you have any thoughts on that, Rob?
In terms of if you wanted to make a complaint to Telstra directly, if you felt you'd been scammed, is that what the question is?
Yeah, so I guess if Telstra, you know, I guess you were giving some examples. I know Julie was giving some examples, you know, Telstra or someone pretending to be Telstra contacting you, and certainly we've all had those. Yeah, well, reporting that back to them and having an easy avenue to do that seems a sensible suggestion. Yes,
well, I guess the Australian or the Cyber Commission is certainly trying to work with businesses to allow customers and the like who have been affected to make that reporting easier. It's obvious a work in progress, and you know, particularly with those organisations like a Telstra or an Optus or those large communication companies, you're not often speaking to someone within Australia. You might be speaking to someone in India or Malaysia or somewhere. So it's certainly something I know the Cyber Commission is looking at to try and make the ease of that notification a lot simpler. Yeah, and look, it relates to the next question that I think is a really good one as well, and you just touched on then, Rob, which is from Brendan. He's asking, how do organisations control scam text messages and phone calls? Because I imagine that's going to be a lot harder to track, as you were mentioning, than if it was an email. Yes, well, there's software being updated, you know, on a daily basis in terms of that can pick up scam emails, that can pick up those type of things, which is why we're always requiring regular backups, regular software updates. When Microsoft issues a software update, that you put it on straight away. Your IT service provider who's supplying you with your IT systems, that you're regularly updating whatever they're providing you. In addition to that, it all comes down to employee training when it comes to email and scams. And it's regularly sitting down with your employees and drilling into them that they've always got to be on the lookout for these scam emails. If something's unfamiliar, if something sounds too good to be true, if they're clicking on a link whilst they're on Facebook or Instagram, be very careful about what you're clicking on. I think in probably 90% of the cases that we see in areas such as probably more so social engineering. It's all, it comes down to that employee training and making them aware that these cyber criminals are out there and they're sending these emails. We refer them to them as phishing emails, to try and get you to respond or click on a link that will then put malware or ransomware onto your system.
Yeah, I think that's a really, great point, Rob. It's very much down to the individual responsibility of each employee, isn't it, to really be vigilant and skeptical.
Yes.
Definitely, at CPA Australia, we get a Friday, I think it's called a Friday phishing email almost every Friday. I haven't received mine yet today, so hopefully we'll get it soon, giving us some rundown on sort of some of the latest scams coming through, and sometimes giving us a little training exercise to see if we would get caught out. So yeah, and I know other members have said, sometimes get a little brief morning sort of update when they log into their computer, just reminding them of some of the scams that are out there. So yeah, everyone, I guess, getting on board within the organisation, that's a great answer. So I'm really interested in the answer to this one as well. How often are these scammers tracked down? So are funds ever recovered?
Not
Which of
very
you would
often.
like to take that one? Right, not
Yeah, I'll take that one, and it's not very often that we're able to track down those cyber criminals. You may have heard in the news in recent times, I think some of the big cyber criminals of some of the well-known ransomware plays that have taken place internationally have recently been caught, and it's more often than not, it's sort of Russians, Ukrainians that we're finding are undertaking these attacks. So it's very difficult to find them. Often it's a mix between an organisation of, it could be 100 hackers within this organisation that are set up to purely hack and mine for data and personal information, or it could be one individual sitting in dark room in a basement somewhere who's trying to take down a large organization just for the fun of it. So the answer to that question is very rarely do we catch them.
Yeah,
and
so it's
very
really
rarely do we get them
prevention
back.
rather than, well, obviously you don't want to detect it as well, but yes, it's difficult to deal with once you've already been attacked. So do automated cloud backups provide any protection, or can these also be encrypted by ransomware attacks?
I'm happy to take that one as well. Automatic cloud backups do assist. A cloud backup is often what we call sort of an off-site backup. It's sitting outside your system. We often find that the information, if information has been locked and you've backed up information into the cloud and that service provider has not been affected, then we can get that information back from the cloud. So it's certainly something that I would encourage. Now, in terms of if you're talking about software backups and those sorts of things, again, they certainly provide additional protection.
We've got lots of questions coming through, so which is absolutely fantastic. And I just remind everyone there is a Q&A section separate from the chat, and if possible, we will address the questions in the chat as well that are there now. But please keep putting your questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. But it's fantastic that you're all sending through lots of questions. So. So another interesting question. So do cyber criminals always provide the encryption key when you pay?
They do, don't they?
Yes,
Isn't there some kind of rule that they have etiquette that
Oh,
yeah, I believe that's true, that if they say they're going to do it and you pay the money, they give you your stuff back. Is that right, Rob?
it pretty much is correct 90% of the time. These cyber criminals don't want to give themselves a bad name. They want to continue doing doing what they're doing. If they don't release the key and you pay them a ransom, very soon they're going to start to appear on lists that you don't have to pay the ransom because they're not going to release the encryption keys. So we often find it's an honour amongst thieves type scenario where they do provide the encryption key. Where we do find the problem is, whilst they might provide the encryption key, because they've put some sort of malware on your system, there's often bugs that may prevent some of that information from being brought back. Some of your files may be damaged, and that's where we find an additional cost. And in some cases, we just can't get that information back. So whilst in many cases we can get all the information back, there's certainly those cases where the system has been permanently damaged by the malware and we can't obtain those files.
So comment, interesting question, not for either of you, Julie and Rob, but for me, is whether the CPA email can be sent to members as information. So I think that's a really great idea, and I'll certainly follow that up with IT as to whether we can share some of that with members, since the work is already being done this end to identify and address those risks. So great idea. Thanks, Georgia. Now I have another question from Georgia. What can you do with home internet to make it safer? So I know, Rob, you gave an example around it coming through the home computer and being forwarded on. So can you isolate the PCs from one another? Are printers a problem? So what tips do you have for home internet?
For home internet and home users, it's just ensuring that you are updating the latest software security onto your system. I mean, an example is, for those users of iPhones, I know I'm always getting a message saying the latest version of iOS is available for you to download. Now, it's essential that you download that ASAP, because the reason that's been updated is because there's been bugs that have been found within the system. There's possibly doors that have been opened that allow criminals to get in. So it's essential that, like in a business format, that you're updating that security software as and when it becomes available. If your provider is sending out software patches to you and notices, it's essential that you download those, and be a good idea to ensuring that you've got updated hardware as well in terms of your Wi-Fi systems and the like. If you've got something that's been sitting there for the last 5 years, it's probably a good time to update those with your providers, whether it be Telstra or someone else. In terms of printers, again, it's a bit hard to protect your printers, but we've certainly seen in the past that printers have been a way for cyber criminals to gain access, particularly in recent times where you've got your Bluetooth, Wi-Fi enabled devices such as your printers, where it's quite easy for someone to gain access. I guess another good point is, if you are working on a system at home, or you're on the road, or you're in a hotel somewhere, using those openly available Wi-Fi systems often isn't the best thing to do, because there could be someone sitting next door in your hotel room, be someone sitting out the front in a car, who could easily access your systems once you've opened onto a non-secure Wi-Fi system. I know a number of years ago we had an issue involving McDonald's, where the customer was at McDonald's using the McDonald's free Wi-Fi, and ended up getting his system hacked by someone else who was sitting in McDonald's and was able to obtain his personal information. So it's just being wary.
Yeah, and sometimes it comes up with a warning, doesn't it, when you access those public Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Yeah, points.
Yeah,
so
it will say they're unsecure and they take no responsibility. So when you do
Yeah.
see that pop up, it is of concern.
Yeah. So where it's not a direct scam, is it possible to get some information on how and where you check if a security company is reliable and licensed? For example, a tech company specializing in innovative tech solutions and support services for law firms, conveyancers, financial institutions, property planning professionals, and government bodies. So when you're going out, so how to be sure about the whether suppliers are genuine, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, well, it's just asking them the question, and I guess it's questions that you would ask yourself in your own organisation. Ensure that you're asking your suppliers, anybody that you deal with, that they're also using the same, I guess, risk management goals.
Yeah, and often, I mean,
Because
there's ASIC websites, sorry, aren't there, Rob, as well, for example, to check genuine companies and so forth. Sorry, carry on.
yeah, no, sorry, I'm not sure if I was answering that question correctly or not. So stop me if I'm not. But it's just ensuring that those people that you're dealing with are using a similar sort of risk management protocols as you would yourself, because again, often we find that in particular large ransomware type issues that we saw on Julie's first slide, that were the big international companies, often they were breaches that came through service companies. In other words, they didn't attack the company itself. They might have attacked the supplier of their telecommunications, the supplier of their for hoteling, for instance. I know there was a big hotel chain that was done a number of years ago because the company that was outsourced to do all their washing and cleaning got hacked, and they were able to gain access to the hotel through that company. So it's ensuring that all those organisations are just as secure as you.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So Emily is asking about her company, which is going to set up a new manufacturing company, and how they should go about setting up a good cybersecurity system, where they should go for more information about setting that system up.
Well, yeah, I would suggest seeking out cybersecurity. You can Google ones that may be in your local area that will be able to help out and set you up proficiently, as well as your client, to ensure that they have the right security in place. Also, websites like the OAIC website, Australian Cybersecurity website, they're also very good in providing a lot of information as to the minimum levels of security you should be looking at, risk management protocols you should be undertaking. So just a bit of research on those sorts of websites, as well as those third-party service providers in your area, I would suggest.
Now, I think this question we've talked about already, but in case, just give you opportunity in case there's any further comments on this one. One of the biggest risks, as we've discussed, is cyber attack. For a cyber attack is staff and people, and then being vigilant. So what advice can you give on building more cyber resilient organisational culture? Cyber awareness campaigns are somewhat effective, but don't change habits or behaviours. Now, I know we gave a few tips before, so yeah, just open it up if you had anything more to add to that.
It's just repetition on training your staff, I would think. Rob, would you agree with that? Like, just keep drumming it into everyone that it's
absolutely. It's having those regular weekly meetings about what you should be doing and what you should be looking out for, and I guess looking at those, that OAIC website, the Australian Cybersecurity website, which also provides updates of cybersecurity scams. You often see them around tax time. There'll be an influx of ATO related emails. At Christmas time, there's an influx of shopping and Christmas shopping related emails. So it's just regularly drilling it into your staff of these risks and dangers and what to look out for. And then I think you mentioned earlier in terms of having phishing emails sent to your staff. You can outsource this to cybersecurity firms who will on a regular basis send an email to your staff that's set up as a phishing email to try and catch them out. Them opening a document or the like. So they're a good idea as well, because it's sort of keeping your staff on their toes all the time.
Yeah, right. So there's been quite a number of phone calls. I've certainly got them before from the federal, claiming to be from the Federal Police, Border Security, ATO, asking for, so in this question saying, to talk to federal consultant, click 1 or hold on. If you do that, does that mean your information has been hacked already? If you progress beyond listening to the message or the phone call?
Not necessarily, but I would advise going beyond that initial phone call. None of those organisations are going to ask for any of your personal information. The likes of telecommunication companies, the police, anybody like that, they're not going to call you and ask for any personal information. So in those sorts of calls, you should be hanging up straight away. If you feel as if you've gone too far or one step too far, then that's when you can contact places like the OAIC to determine if it's a real and present danger in terms of a hack. But I would just suggest that any of those phone calls that you're hanging up straight away.
Yes, and have you did address a similar question before, whether any major cyber criminals have been brought to justice, and I think that relates to your answer previously around being able to identify those ransomware attackers.
Yes, we haven't seen any here locally. I think they're mainly overseas that they're being brought unstuck now. As I mentioned before, we're seeing groups within Russia and the Ukraine being caught and tried, and I'm not sure what the outcomes of those, because I know there was two of them recently, and I haven't seen the outcome of those yet.
And so another participant has mentioned that it's disappointing that in this day and age that these criminals are not being prosecuted and funds recovered that often anyway. Maybe our bigger systems and authorities need to move on this. So what measures are being taken to sort of deal with cyber security and ransomware attacks in Australia?
Well, the latest that's come out is the government is putting forward a bill for mandatory agents to advise if they've had or if they're paying a ransom, or just if they've had a ransomware attack, so that the records are there. The problem, I guess, in the SME space is that, and in the larger organisation space, is that the organisations haven't been required to notify any authorities that they've been hit with a ransomware attack, or that they've in fact paid a ransom demand. So often the authorities don't know that this is happening. But I think this bill has been tabled, and hopefully it will get passed, and we'll then have a record of, I guess, the extent to which these ransoms are being made. And I'm aware of, there's certain departments now that have been within the police force to specifically go after these ransomware attackers and that sort of thing. So there's certainly things being done, but I think we're a long way off from it being to where we want to be, where these cyber criminals are going to be caught and brought to justice.
Yeah. And we've talked about, although given that information isn't being collected yet, of course, estimates, I guess, on what is this losses through cybercrime are just estimates, I'd assume. But on the and this other question is in relation to estimates of how much firms need to be spending on preventing cybercrime. So I'm not sure that that's going to be an easy question to answer.
No, that's not an easy answer to a question to answer, and what I would say it would be whatever you can afford to.
Yeah.
That would be my answer, because we're seeing companies spend more and more on this now because it's become such a big cost to the system in terms of when they are breached, particularly if they don't have insurance.
So this another question: have you come across any instances of criminals hijacking mobile phone numbers or other means to bypass FMA?
I haven't come
Factor
across anything like
authentication.
that, but I have heard of instances where there have been matters like that, and it's more so only in. I sat down in a presentation only 2 weeks ago where our one of our breach response providers talked about this, that cyber criminals are starting to be more savvy and put in place workarounds around multi-factor authentication. Now, some of that may well be having access to mobile phone numbers so that that second factor authentication is sent to that number and they have access to it. So I think we're finding up until recent times, multi-factor authentication was one of those main areas where you could secure your system. But the cyber criminals, being the cyber criminals, they're always going to find a workaround, and they're starting to do that now. And I think that's something that we will begin to see more of in terms of that hijacking of mobile phone numbers so they can access that second factor.
Now we've just about used up our time, and we've still got a few more questions here, but I might just pick another final question so that we can then wrap up the webinar. Do you think that online accounting software is safer than a PC with good security? So Georgia is saying that she's worried given that Microsoft and Google are being attacked. So cloud accounting software versus PC.
Yeah, I would say a mix of the two would be your best bet, because George is right there. The likes of Microsoft, Google, all those big providers are being attacked on a regular basis, and the cyber criminals are finding workarounds, which is why we're seeing such regular software patch updates sent out by those providers. But I would suggest that you know, you still have trust and faith in those providers, but you ensure that you're updating those software patches as and when they send them through. But at the same time, having that updated security on your PC, whether it's Norton antivirus or one of those others, that you're regularly updating that software on your PC.
I think we thank you so much, Rob, and thank you so much, Julie. And I think we best wrap up there. We've hit the hour. We've still got some more questions there, but we'll have a look at those after this webinar finishes. Thank you so much to both of you for that really insightful presentation with a packed full of information. Really appreciate it. And so now I will hand back to Melissa to wind up the webinar. Thank you, Julie and Rob.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claire, and thank you to Julie and Rob for your session today, and thanks to everyone for your participation. In the next 3 working days, you'll receive an evaluation survey accompanied by the recording of this webinar. We really appreciate your feedback as it is extremely valuable to CPA Australia to help us deliver better events for you. Thanks again, and we look forward to welcoming you to another CPA Australia webinar soon.
Thank you.